After the death of King Akhenaten, the worship of the god Aton started to diminish as a religion. Then Tutankhamun, after ascending the throne, moved the capital back to Thebes from Tel el-Hamadna. Tutankhamun's name was Tutankhaton during the reign of Akhenaten, but he changed his name to Tutankhamun after the god of gods, Amun. Thus began again the supremacy of the religion of Amun in Thebes, and the hymns and songs glorifying Amun, god of gods, or supreme deity, were heard anew. Then came Hatshepsut, who carried out a few changes in the temple building. Between the fourth and fifth pylons, she erected two obelisks, of which the northern one is still there, with a height of 29.5 meters. This obliged her to remove the ceiling of the hall with Osiris pillars erected by her father. Hatshepsut also built a few pavilions, now found on the sides of the chamber of the sacred boat. Sacred lake which was used for purification and cleansing. The unshaven were forbidden to step into the lake. It is believed that only priests with shaved heads were allowed in its water. We're now visiting the Luxor Museum. Thutmose III appears in eternal youth in the statue, wearing the Nemes headcloth and marching forward with confidence. This statue is considered one of the great works of the Egyptian art in the New Kingdom. Here is a relief of the head of Thutmose III wearing the Atif crown of the New Kingdom, 18th dynasty, 1490 to 1436 BC. For one called Pamonedja. The text on the statue mentions that Pamonedja, the first messenger of the king, was greatly favored by his king. 18th dynasty, end of the reign of Thutmose III, 1490 to 1436 BC. Let us look closely here under the branches of the secret Imat tree, where we find a picture of the crocodile god Sobek, resplendent upon a throne with a deity called the goddess of the breeze, accepting prayers from Bia, the high priest of the god Sobek. We also see some texts. Was in the temple of the crocodile god Sobek in Hampshire, ancient Samo. It was a gift from Nefer, the treasurer of Ammon, whose picture appears on the side of the block in bas relief. A statue of Amenhotep III with the crocodile god Sobek. Ramesses II usurped this statue and attributed it to himself. He removed the name Amenophis III at the front of Sobek's seat and added yet other texts with his name on the base and on the king's belt. This huge statue was found inside a well, prepared for it and filled with water. This is a stela which glorifies the victories of King Kamose over Apophis, king of the Hyksos. It tells of the king's victory in Avaris, the Hyksos capital in the delta, and his triumphal return to Thebes. Those boats were supplied by Tutankhamun for his tomb. They were meant to transport his soul from his tomb in Thebes to Abydos, the center of worship of Osiris, Lord of the Dead. When Tutankhamun was buried in his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, he was supplied with a fleet of models of ships and boats numbering not less than 22 vessels. This papyrus describes the Egyptian belief that the sun dies every night to be reborn the following morning. They also believed that every good soul is born anew to live an eternal life after death. This papyrus depicts the hieroglyphic sign that symbolizes the West, out of which two hands arise carrying the sun disk to the netherworld. The ancient Egyptian belief in life after death was similar to the rising of the sun the following day. A statue of the scribe Amenhotep, son of Hapu in the reign of Amenhotep III. The goddess Sekhmet, whose worship flourished in the New Kingdom period. Akhenaten claims that he was the founder of that style of art represented in such a head. This painting, found in the temple of Karnak, is from the reign of Amenophis IV, who later became Akhenaten, meaning faithful to the god Aton, who resides in the sun's disk. This painting depicts a scene of activity of Egyptian workers attached to the temple and workshop. There are some scenes of the king worshipping the sun's disk, Aton, and some with his wife, Nefertiti. This painted limestone statue is from the Middle Kingdom period, or the 12th dynasty, 1971 to 1962 BC. A sarcophagus decorated with bright colors and design from the 21st to the 23rd dynasties, 1080 to 750 BC, beginning of the late period. Head of a colossal statue. This is one of the last additions to the temple built by Amenhotep III in the Karnak area. This is the head of a cow, representing the deity Tauret, one of the forms of the cow-headed goddess Hathor from the tomb of Tutankhamun. A statue of the god Ammon with the face of Tutankhamun. Head of King Senusert III from the Middle Kingdom, 1878 to 1840 BC. A royal sculpture of this period is characterized by a new style called the realistic style, which expresses the king's features. A depiction of musicians and dancers. During great religious festivals, Thebes would be flowing with gaiety and leisure. Musicians, singers and dancers would roam the city celebrating. A painted block engraved with a picture of the god Ammon-Min, one of the forms of Ammon, integrated with the deity Min, god of eternal fertility. Bust of King Amenophis II. It is 110 centimeters in height, dates from the New Kingdom, 18th dynasty, 1439 to 1413 BC. After the Luxor Museum, we're going to see here two colossi set up at the gate of the temple of Amenhotep III, of which nothing remains but those colossi. Each one is a statue of King Amenhotep, seated on a square throne with a low pedestal. This colossus of Amenhotep III used to produce a whistling sound as the wind passed through it every dawn. So the Greeks named the statue Memnon, the Ethiopian hero who helped the Trojans during the siege of their city and was killed by Achilles. His mother, the goddess of dawn, Aurora, tearfully asked the god Zeus to see her son apart from other humans, so he used to appear to her at dawn as a sound. She would weep upon hearing him, and her tears would fall as dew. The New Kingdom kings chose this area to build their tombs in the cliffs of the western bank. Pharaonic kings need to identify themselves with the sun. The sun rose in the morning and set in the evening, and rose again the following day. Similarly, pharaohs would live again in the afterlife, just as the sun always rises the following morning. That is why they chose the West Bank for their tombs, where the sun sets, and the East Bank for their temples, where the sun rises, and life starts again every morning. It was customary to place a papyrus in the deceased sarcophagus, including a large number of religious formulae from the Book of the Dead to facilitate the deceased's passage to the region of Osiris. There were some scenes and texts indicating the trial of the dead, drawn or written on papyrus sheets wrapped around the mummy and also on the walls of the tombs and the sarcophagi. The tomb of Tutankhamun, which was discovered intact by Howard Carter in 1922 after surviving looting by robbers for 3,350 years. Here we see King I performing the last religious rites for Tutankhamun, known as the opening of the mouth ceremony. The tomb of Ramesses VI, which includes scenes from the Book of the Netherworld. The ceiling of the tomb is decorated with scenes of Nut, goddess of the sky. According to tradition, a papyrus was placed inside the sarcophagus of the deceased with a great number of religious spells. Those spells from the Book of the Dead facilitated his passage to the paradise of Osiris. There are some scenes and texts which refer to the final judgment written or painted on a papyrus covering the body of the deceased or on the walls of some tombs and sarcophagus. Now we will know what happened in the Hall of Judgment on the entry of the deceased after purification from all sins, and he may say, I salute all ye gods. I know you, and I know your names. I shall not grow weak and fall in front of your weapons, nor in front of this God you follow. I fulfilled truth and justice on the land of Egypt. Now we will see how the final judgment is carried out in the afterlife. Osiris, accompanied by 42 gods for judging the deceased, innocent, in front of the court. I live with truth, I feed from the justice of my heart, so I gave the bread to the hungry, and water to the thirsty. I dressed the naked with clothes, and presented holy sacrifices to gods, food offerings to the deceased, so save me and protect me from the great God, because I am a purified man. Of Amenhotep II. The burial chamber has been decorated with bright columns, and it appears as if it is a huge open papyrus roll with scenes and texts from the Book of the Afterlife. As for its ceiling, it was painted blue with yellow stars. On the columns of this hall, King Amenhotep is depicted accepting the Ankh, symbol of life, from each of the gods of Osiris, Anubis, and Hathor, all of them deities of the other world. Another famous tomb is that of Hormoheb. It includes beautiful scenes with painted details. The discovery of this tomb is considered to be one of the greatest discoveries prior to that of the tomb of Tutankhamun. It was found by the American archaeologist Theodore Davis and his assistant on the 25th of February 1908. The tomb of Hormoheb at the Valley of the Kings was not the first to be built by him, as he had an earlier one that was prepared at the beginning of his life when he was an officer at Saqqara. Blocks from his Saqqara tomb can be found in various museums: Leiden, Berlin, London, Paris, Vienna. Tomb of Ramesses I, father of Seti I, decorated with paintings and texts in beautiful colors. A Nile cruise heading to Abydos to make a pilgrimage ritual. Tomb of Ramesses III, decorated with scenes and beautiful colors, where Ramesses III presents offerings. A boat carrying the mourners during the passage of the deceased to the western bank to set the funerary rituals before him with offerings. Assyrians and Nubians in the 19th dynasty period. Depictions of the god Anubis, god of the dead. Sennacherib and his wife seated in the fields of the afterlife during the crop harvest. The brightly colored tomb of Nacht, a high state official during the reign of Thutmose IV. The tomb of Ramos is one of the largest tombs built for high officials at the end of the reign of King Amenhotep III and beginning of the reign of Amenhotep IV, or Akhenaten. Tomb of Rekhmira was decorated with reliefs and drawings depicting handicrafts and industries. The reign of Thutmose III, 18th dynasty. The tomb of Nefertari, wife of Ramesses II. The artist excelled to perfection in coloring those scenes and in precise, bold lines, especially the scenes depicting the beautiful queen. Here is depicted travel in the solar boat. It includes the dead persons led by Isis and Khipri. The 19th dynasty tomb of Seti I is considered one of the largest and most important royal tombs carved in the rocks of the cliffs. It is more than 300 meters long and is still characterized by its bright colors, beautiful scenes, and amazing reliefs. It was known during the Greek period and was later named the Belzoni tomb after it was rediscovered by him on the 17th of October in 1817. The architect Senmut constructed in the mountain cliff a commemorative temple for Queen Hatshepsut on 3 main levels in the form of terraces surmounting each other. He added pavilions for carrying out worship and rites to each of Ammon, Ra, Harakhti, Anubis, and the goddess Hathor. The temple was not used to prepare religious and funerary rites for the queen herself or her father Thutmose I, or even his second wife Queen Ahmose, but it was dedicated primarily to the worship of the great god Ammon, god of Thebes. Pavilions were also constructed for Ra-Harakhti, god of Heliopolis, whose worship obliged that holy rites be carried out on an altar exposed to the sun, as well as for the god Anubis, god of the dead, and the goddess Hathor, lady of the west. Construction of this temple was started in the 8th or 9th year of Queen Hatshepsut's reign. Good limestone was used in it. The temple of Hatshepsut clearly demonstrates the antagonism between her and Thutmose III, whom she managed by virtue of her strong personality to exclude from the throne of Egypt because of his young age. This temple was given a name during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, meaning the Holy of Holies of Ammon. This was shortened in the Ramesside period to the Holy Spot. The name Deir al-Bahari, Northern Monastery, is an Arabic name given to this area in the 7th century AD after the Copts used the temple as a monastery. We are visiting the funerary temple of Ramesses II, the Ramesseum. The Greeks called it Mammonia, maybe because of the similarity between the colossus of Ramesses II inside it and the legendary Ethiopian hero Memnon, son of Tethys and the goddess of dawn, Aurora. It is possible that the colossal size of the statues of Amenhotep III and Ramesses II were the reason for giving the name Memnon to them, especially as the temple was constructed not far from the Memnon statue. The Greeks also thought that this temple was the tomb of King Ozymandias. The present name of the temple is the Ramesseum. text and figures. Ramesses always used to record his victories on the walls of any temple he built, and especially the Battle of Kadesh, which dates from the 5th year of his reign. We now review the temple of Ramesses III, known as Medinat Habu, one of the largest temples dedicated to commemorating pharaohs in the New Kingdom. It encloses a large area, 320 meters in length from east to west, and 200 meters in breadth from north to south. It is the only fortified temple. It was most probably built in 2 stages, the first one including the temple itself with its accessories inside a rectangular wall. The second stage started in the second half of Ramesses III's reign, when the outer wall with its 2 large fortified gates in the east and west was constructed. Ruined mud brick houses, which were built by the Romans to house servants and entourage. Here to the north and south of the temple, we see the houses of the priests, state officials and slaves. Those houses used to hold about 2,500 persons. And here we see that Ramesses III has recorded his military battles and victories on the outer walls of the temple. This was a common tradition during the Ramesside period. This first courtyard was decorated with columns, with some figures and inscriptions in beautiful colors. The walls too are not devoid of beautiful inscriptions and drawings in bright, attractive colors. The second courtyard with pillars and columns on its sides engraved with beautiful images. An image of the winged sun disk. We reach Dendera, capital of the 6th nome of Upper Egypt, cult center of the goddess Hathor, who had various forms and characteristics, although her main function was deity of love and happiness. She's thus the Egyptian equivalent of the Greek goddess Aphrodite. Dendera was famous in Egyptian legends, going back to the beginning of creation, as the theater of one of the large battles between Horus, god of Idfu, and Seth, god of evil. It is known that the battle ended with the crowning and marriage of Horus of Idfu to Hathor, goddess of Dendera. Hathor is represented in ancient Egyptian religious art in the form of a woman with a cow's head and the sun's disk between the horns on her head. This later developed into a woman's head with cow's ears, which is the image of Hathor here. Christianity, some temples were converted to churches, where rites and rituals of the Christian religion were performed. And here is the temple of Seti I in Abydos, the second most important city after Thebes, and going back to the 1st and 2nd dynasties. According to legend, the tomb of Osiris, god of the dead, who became a symbol for the dead king, is in Abydos. It became the duty of Egyptians used to visit the tomb of Osiris in order to regain their bodies and enjoy the presentation of offerings at the tables of the gods in sacred places. Abydos became a sacred shrine visited by Egyptian pilgrims to present offerings and gifts in order to gain Osiris' favor before and after death. The temple of Horus, Edfu, was built in the period 237 to 212 BC. Its construction lasted 25 years, while work on decorations, inscriptions and sculpture took 6 whole years. It was finally completed in 207 BC. Disturbances in Upper Egypt delayed the progress of work in the temple. Work was later resumed and the temple was officially opened in 142 BC in the reign of Ptolemy VII, Euergetos II. A number of kings continued building and decorating this temple down to 58 BC. The image of the god was preserved in a shrine on the boat that was carried by priests on festival days. Here we note that the temple of Komombo enjoys a wonderful location on the eastern bank of the Nile. It consists of the remnants of the old temple and pharaonic city on which were erected a Ptolemaic city and a more significant temple. Komombo's main fame lies in the double temple of Perioris Sobek. Legends tell us how Sobek ousted his brother Horus from the town and how all the inhabitants followed him to exile. When Sobek was left with no one to tend the fields, he resorted to his magic and summoned up the dead to carry out his work. They obeyed him, but they sowed gold and money instead of grain, so the land dried up and became a desert without plants or water. It appears that the reason behind the sudden growth, prosperity and importance of Komombo is that the Ptolemies established a large number of permanent military posts along the Red Sea coast, as well as the increase in traffic on the Nile. We see the island of Philae, Anasilugud. It's a small rocky island in the center of the Nile. It is composed of rose granite covered with Nile silt at different levels. The temples of Philae are today among the oldest buildings on this magical island, as the Nubian king Taharqa, the 25th dynasty pharaoh, built his first pavilion in the 7th century BC. King Nectenbo erected another small pavilion close to it and dedicated it to the worship of Isis. It is odd that the worship of Isis was popular in this area, which used to revere the god Khnum, deity of the island of Elephantine. Period of Egyptian history, Egyptian religion added lots of characteristics to the god Osiris, rendering him a deity of flora and goodness. It was said that parts of Osiris' body were buried on Biga, a small island close to the Philae. Isis used to visit her husband on his island in grand festivals more than once a year. The temple of Isis, goddess of love and beauty, stood amidst those wonderful temples, a unique monument surrounded by the river and cataract. Amid all of this, we can see the artistic treasures of architecture, sculpture, and inscriptions. The temple of Ramesses II in Nubia, in Abu Simbel, one of the greatest, largest, and most stupendous works achieved by an Egyptian architect throughout history. As we can see, it was cut into the rock on the banks of the Nile. The temple is about 63 meters in depth in the rock, and the statue of King Ramesses were cut into the rock on the facade of the temple, having a height of 12 meters. This temple was dedicated to the sun god Ra-Harakhti, to Ptah of Memphis, to Amon-Ra, and to Ramesses himself. At the vernal and autumnal equinoxes, the sun falls on the site of the temple, which is directed several degrees to the south. This allows the sun to shine directly on the face of Ramesses II inside the temple on the 22nd of October of each year. Ramesses II decorated the walls of his temple with his many achievements, military conquests, battles, and punishing of captives. He was a strong, stubborn warrior king who reveled not only in victory, battle, and rule, but also in conquering the hearts of women. He married 8 wives and had 96 sons and daughters. Queen Nefertari had a special place in Ramesses II's heart and was his favorite and most beloved wife. So he ordered his architects to build this temple for her in reverence to the goddess Hathor. Egyptians used it as the main center for Egyptian religion in Nubia. Queen Nefertari had an effective role in Ramesses II's life because of her intense beauty and intelligence. Her name means beauty of beauties in the Egyptian language. We now move from visiting the Nile and its banks to visiting Alexandria, the bride of the Mediterranean Sea. We see sunboats floating around in the Mediterranean. Nowadays, modern people of Alexandria have the same habit of taking boat rides as a kind of entertainment, especially before sunset. Now we start our tour through the corridors of the Greco-Roman Museum, located in Alexandria on the Mediterranean Sea. This is the facade of the Greco-Roman Museum, built with the same style of Greco-Roman temples. The facade of the temple was decorated with 6 Doric columns. This museum is considered one of the rare old classic buildings of Alexandria, reflecting the style of the ancient city. The museum was built in 1892 and expanded later on. Attached to it is a garden with ancient monuments dating back to different periods. The museum is divided into 27 halls with monuments brought from Alexandria and El Fayoum. This museum is considered one of the most important ones, reflecting a distinguished phase of the ancient Egyptian history. It comprises a collection of monuments of Alexander the Great, who established the city of Alexandria, which was named after him. There is a head of Alexander the Great, made out of red granite with its different style from that of the ancient Egyptian art. The wonderful technique of the sculpture can be easily noticed. of Alexander the Great made out of marble, depicting Alexander with short hair and an expressive look. This head dates back to the 1st century BC. A mosaic showing Queen Berenice II and signed with the name of the artist Theophilus, dating back to the 3rd century AD, exhibited in Hall 6. The Queen is dressed as a warrior. On her head is a shape similar to a boat, and in her hand she's holding something similar to an oar. Most probably, those symbols refer to the city of Alexandria due to its location on the sea. This piece is called after the name of its artist, so it is known as the Palette of Theophilus. A marble statue of Serapis in human form. The god Serapis is represented in the form of a middle-aged man wearing a Greek tunic, and on his forehead are his famous 5 tresses of hair. He is carrying a modus on his head. Another statue of the god Serapis in human form with a heavy beard made out of sycamore wood. This statue is covered with a painted layer of plaster, and traces of red color still exist. A white marble statue of the goddess Isis, who was worshipped in Alexandria in the Greco-Roman period. She was the wife of Serapis and bore him their son Harpocrates. In the Roman period, goddess Isis was considered the goddess of the ancient world. This statue was brought from the temple of Ras al-Soda in Alexandria. Alexandria, many heads from statues of philosophers and ancient historians were discovered. A bust of Socrates, one of the famous philosophers of ancient Greece. A funerary stela with a scene of a Macedonian horseman. A funerary stela made of limestone in the form of the front of an ancient Egyptian temple. The deceased is standing in his Greek dress. Two Roman soldiers, one of whom is holding the hand of a child. Another scene of a mermaid wearing the clothes of goddess Sphinx. Arsinoe II and Ptolemy IV. A statue for the goddess of love and beauty Aphrodite and her child Eros. She's shown taking off her sandals. This statue is considered a sample of the artist's way of expressing the movements of the body. The goddess Aphrodite played a great role in the history of Egypt, and because of love, led Cleopatra VII to lead the world. The best example of this is her relationship with Julius Caesar, who forgot his duty towards his country and remained beside Cleopatra in Egypt for a long time. Julius Caesar, the famous Roman leader, ahead of the Roman Emperor Octavius. Head of one of the queens. A marble head of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, who visited Egypt and made 2 tours down the Nile. He erected the city of Antinopolis, nowadays Al-Sheikh Ibada, as a commemoration for his friend Antonius, who was drowned in the Nile in the same city. The Roman Emperor Hadrian was the first to have a beard, since he was greatly influenced by the Greek civilization. A stone sarcophagus painted on 4 sides with scenes for Greek gods, such as Dionysus, god of wine. He looked at the sleeping Adrian and fell in love from the first sight, then married her. The lid of the sarcophagus takes the form of a Greek altar. Of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, wearing a soldier's uniform. This statue was discovered under the theatre of Saint Dermish at Alexandria. This statue had been placed in one of the ancient squares of Alexandria. On the belt of the emperor, there's a cross, since he was the first emperor to convert to Christianity, and then the new religion spread throughout the country. After the Greco-Roman Museum, the tour will see the important archaeological sites of Alexandria. Here we can see one of the squares of Alexandria crowded with people, cars, and different means of transportation. Alexandria in full swing 24 hours a day. Some of the young people jogging. The mosque of Al-Mursi Abu al-Abbas, which is considered one of the most important mosques, is different from any other. Then the nice buildings of Alexandria along the coast of the Mediterranean. The architect Dinocrates was the first to design the city for Alexander the Great and divided it into 5 districts. Some boats used by the people of Alexandria as their means of entertainment down by the sea. The fort of Bay, which the Egyptian army used against invaders. Here, the fishermen took this part as a marina for their boats. Pompey's pillar with two sphinxes beside it. After our visit to Alexandria, located on the Mediterranean Sea, we move to Sinai. We see Wadi al-Hammamet on the Red Sea, which was reached by the workmen of the Pharaonic period. They left those drawings on the huge rocks with some hieroglyphic inscriptions and relief expressing their daily life. The monastery of Saint Anthony, and we see one of the monks while working on a grinder, proof that they still live the ascetic life. The church inside the monastery, in the middle of which there's a lamp from ancient times, and on the walls a number of icons. Monastery of Saint Catherine, which is cut in the mountain, and above it there is the tower with the bell. The Well of Moses, crowded by people to drink from it and gain blessings, some icons for Jesus Christ. Some of the tourists while performing some of the church religious rites. From here we can see the monastery from up above on the mountain. The top of the mountain of Moses, on which he received the 10 Commandments. This scene describes the route which Moses undertook to cross the sea and flee with his people from the Pharaoh of Egypt. We can see the Red Sea in the city of Hurghada, where aquatic festivals with sailing boats are held. In Ras Muhammad, we see the characteristic underwater coral reef with great variety and color, as if presenting a fashion show in an undersea carnival, dancing to musical tunes and melodies. It is no surprise that swimming and diving can be practiced here in summer and in winter, as the climate is moderate throughout the year. on the Red Sea ends our visit, during which we've seen the greatest achievements of the pharaohs and come to know a lot about this civilization which has become famous the world over. This is the story of our civilization across the ages, the history of our nation. Its glory has been written on stone from the dawn of civilization. Its temples amazing and awe-inspiring as they represent the first civilization to appear. Its land bountiful with plants and grain, and its Nile the source of goodness, happiness and prosperity.